Welcome everyone back to another SCP Resurrection reading. Today we'll be reading Part 2-9, Ballgags and Scrambled Eggs by Lurk D and Dr. Clef. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Ballgags and Scrambled Eggs. It was midnight when they dragged Dietrich and Bridge out of their beds, pinning them down before they had a chance to react. Filthy rubber ball gags were thrust into their mouths, shortly followed by black bags over the head. Despite struggling, they were quickly zip-tied by the wrists and ankles and then thrown roughly out into the hallway. Dietrich struggled as best he could. He tried to blindly headbutt his assailant, but missed. Before he could wind up for a second try, he felt a pair of cold metal probes pressed against his bare inner thigh.
Try that again, and I'll tease you until you shit yourself unconscious,
a low voice growled. Dietrich froze. He had no desire to spend his last moments in soiled underwear, and he was fucking sick to death of being tased at this point. The next half hour passed by in a blur. He had a vague impression of being thrown into the back of a van together with Bridge, who was also similarly bound and gagged. The van was driven for a long time, making sharp turns at odd intervals that indicated that the driver was trying to throw off his passenger's sense of direction. Eventually, though, the van came to a halt. The doors were opened and both were dragged out of the vehicle inside a cold room and strapped to a chair. The bag was removed from Dietrich's head. His first impression was a bright flash of light, cold, hard, instantaneous, leaving a rectangular afterimage in his abused retina. Aside from that, only darkness and the vague impression of a sinister figure sitting in a high-backed chair. A low voice behind him growled in his ear.
Name.
Dietrich mumbled helplessly around the ball gag.
It.
The voice growled. A pair of hands, wearing leather gloves, removed the gag. Dietrich immediately screamed as loud as he could.
Ah, fuck! Help! Somebody!
The gag was reinserted, and then Bridge's bag and gag was removed. The silent figure leaned forward into his ear.
Name.
I'm the goddamn Wizard of Oz, Dietrich heard Bridge say, the sound of spitting soon following. Then, the sound of another muffled cry as the ball gag was reinserted. Dietrich looked around desperately for any kind of reflective surface and found none. His heart sank. Then his spirits rose. Alexandra might be listening, and if Alexandra was listening, there was a chance that rescue was already on its way. He let out another low, muffled cry, and the shadowy figure came up behind him, undid the buckle on his ball gag.
Let's try this one last time,
the deep voice sneered. And Dietrich felt the muzzle of a gun pressed against the back of his head.
Tell me your name.
All Dietrich could do was stall. Stall for all he's worth till the cavalry rushed him.
Dietrich Lurk,
he whimpered.
Pa's family was Scottish. That's where the last name comes from. Oh, God, please, just please don't kill me.
That depends on how you answer this next question,
the voice said.
What's Lambda 2?
Lambda 2? I don't know nothing about any Lambda 2.
Dietrich whimpered, then let out a high-pitched scream when he heard a pistol slide being drawn back behind his head.
Wait, please, he howled. I can tell you something.
Talk now,
the voice shouted angrily.
I heard a rumor. It's a secret mobile task force. They're all beautiful women. They're all naked, and they do nothing but give Clef blowjobs all day.
What?
The voice shouted. This time, the cry was incredulous. He could hear Bridge cackling against the gag.
Where the fuck did you hear that?
Dietrich pondered on his next response, and then he felt a hand clamp over his mouth, then a gunshot went off. There was silence for only a second. The feeling of early morning piss running down his leg was a sure indicator that he was not dead. He was still alive? Then someone tipped over his chair onto its side, and he felt the bowl gag go back into his mouth, and then he heard someone come up behind Bridge and say,
I've just blown your redneck friend's brains out. Lie to me like he did and you get the same. Now tell me, what is Lambda 2?
a slow, shuddering breath, and then, in a panic, pissed-off scream, Dietrich heard Bridge shout,
It's up your mom's ass!
click. The other lights turned on. Standing over Bridge was a gentleman in a hunter green suit. Dietrich muffled a question through the ball gag, then felt it slide out of his mouth. The room turned out to be a standard Foundation office block. Dietrich could see 8 standard-issue cubicles of the type he had spent countless hours in over the past few years. They were laying on plastic sheeting. The smell of urine and fear hung in the air. A man wearing a ridiculous hat, smiling mirthlessly, stood before them.
You both pass,
Director Alto Clef said.
What?
Dietrich panted as he started to regain his bearings.
You were fucking with us?
Hans grabbed Dietrich by the shoulder as he was lifted right side up off the hard floor. Then, that same deep, sinister voice.
Now the second part of the test is going to involve sexually pleasuring guards for intel. You'll be practicing on us. Ready?
Bridge coughed as Dietrich audibly gulped, but it was overshadowed by his assailant's laughter. The woman in a matte black catsuit walked in front of him.
These Vox converters are awesome,
she said in a surprisingly deep manly voice, the same manly voice that was threatening him earlier. She removed the device from around her neck and tossed it back to Clef.
Andrea S. Adams. Pleased to make your acquaintance. You've already met Agent Fox.
Dietrich let out a frustrated sigh upon hearing that feminine voice. He'd been duped. Bridge cackled silently in rage and relief.
Did I hear that right, though? I mean, I nearly broke character when you said that there was an entire task force dedicated to giving Clef blowjobs.
Adams glowered suspiciously at Clef, sitting at his desk.
Makes me wonder who started those rumors.
Wasn't me, Clef said. Like I got the time or semen for something like that. Let's get them cleaned up and have this meeting.
Everyone was calm and cool on the other side of the table. Both Bridge and Dietrich had trouble mixing the powdered creamer and sugar into their respective hot drinks with shaky hands, but their adrenaline was finally starting to plateau after getting changed into clean clothes. Alexandra's avatar was floating on the screen of the mounted LCD monitor on the wall, and Merle was standing in the corner, just listening to the conversation. Adams and Clef sat together with a stack of papers off to the side while Fox leaned against an adjacent wall.
So, I heard you both had a little trouble on the way in.
Clef sat there grinning from ear to ear with Adams on his left drumming her fingers.
I'll say, I can only protect these two so much, you know?
Alexandra smiled broadly at the group. Bridge inhaled with a growl and said aloud what Dietrich was clearly thinking too.
Don't tell us you set that up too.
What? No. Not my style to organize a firing squad on the highway. No, I imagine whoever set that up is playing their own games with you. But that's something we'll get into later.
Clef then slid a file folder across the table.
Omega-7. Here is the official report on what really happened to them. You'll need to know this in order to know why you're being assigned to Lambda 2.
Dietrich tilted his head.
Omega-7's a dirty word whispered round the water cooler, sir. I've only read what was sent out after the accident, that and the rumors. I don't believe either, but I always imagined it was a mix of both.
Adams piped up.
The truth is far worse. Omega-7 completely shit itself and imploded.
Lost a lot of collateral, lost a lot of good folks. Clef nodded, then leaned forward. Gents, according to all official records, Lambda 2 is an adjunct task force intended to provide temporary support to other MTFs. For the foreseeable future, we will be adjunct to Mobile Task Force Alpha 9er. Do you understand? Everyone nodded. Great, Clef continued. Because that is all a lie. We're not Alpha 9er's assistants, we're their babysitters. Bridge raised an eyebrow as he finished sipping his green tea. Fuck's that mean? Clef and Adams glanced at each other briefly. To put it bluntly, Adams said, if you dig around a bit further, you'll find out that we're the eyes, ears, and the failsafe. Dietrich was already skimming through the file. By the time he reached the 4th page, he stopped drinking his coffee altogether. Is this for real? Abel? Afraid so. Bridge already did his homework and didn't need to see the file. His clearance and access to reports were unquestioned. So, why do you need us? You'd need an army to go after a rogue task force. Clef just shook his head and chuckled. Because our job isn't actually to make sure Alpha 9er doesn't go rogue. Dietrich and Bridge both looked at each other, confusingly, but Clef held up his hand before either could comment. Let me explain. Lambda 2 doesn't actually exist. It exists on the charts, it has a budget, it has offices, but the entire Mobile Task Force is actually a cover for our MTF TAV 666. TAV 666? Bridge asked. No, TAV. Clef snapped. Hebrew alphabet, not Greek. Why is that so hard for people? Anyway, our mission is to make sure that Alpha 9er doesn't explode in our faces. Dietrich nodded with an understanding. Ah. I'm not sure I understand, Bridge said. Isn't that the same thing as watching over Alpha 9er? Depends on how you define watching over, Adams interjected. Do you mean in the sense of a prison warden or a bodyguard? Bridge nodded in understanding. Ah, he said, echoing Dietrich. Alpha 9er has the possibility of being the single most destructive thing to ever happen to the Foundation, Clef explained, for 2 reasons. First of all, Alpha 9er itself could go bad, anomalies could go rogue. Abel could happen again. But there's another possibility. That's just as dangerous. Sabotage. Who? Dietrich asked. There are elements in the Overseer Council that have a vested interest in maintaining current policies regarding human anomalies, Clef said. He crumpled his paper cup and tossed it into the trash. Given the recent information leaks and the current status of Alpha 9er, we've decided that this is the most serious threat. So, to go back and answer your question, a couple of techies might not help a whole lot when it comes to stopping a rogue task force, but they'll be a hell of a lot more useful in rooting out a saboteur. And don't think that the choice of you two wasn't deliberate, Clef continued. Based on Agent Lurk's profile, he has the makings of a man who has nearly made a profession of keeping under the radar. Him and his little friend both know the ins and outs of how to do just that. Dietrich's eyes grew as large as dinner plates. Merle only shrugged, signifying that he too was dumbfounded. Alexandra, Dietrich stopped holding his breath and relaxed, on loan from 19. Really, a capable tool in achieving what is needed in the ways of surveillance. I saw how she handled herself after 17's little meltdown a few weeks ago. It impressed a lot more than just a few directors. Django Bridge, well, that was really Dietrich's choice to bring him along. Not my first pick, but he'll do in a pinch. Bridge rolled his eyes and looked at Fox, who gave a nasally snark at Clef's statement. And you, Agent Fox, Clef continued. You 3 met during the evac. He's going to be your semi-official escort. What? Fox stopped smirking. Bridge breathed a ha. You didn't get that memo? Yeah. With this last little assassination attempt, they'll need an escort. Neither of them can shoot worth a damn, especially considering one of them is an XMTF. We won't mention any names for the sake of Dietrich Lurk. Dietrich opened his mouth for rebuttal, but then quickly shut it. Fox then walked over from the wall. So, I am babysitting then. Clef cocked his head slightly and leaned in his chair. Just for a little while till things simmered down. Oh, and they'll need to crash at your place tonight. I can't have it on record that they were actually here. Espionage is a fickle bitch. Fox opened his mouth to protest. Before you even start, Cliff interrupted, I did ensure that you are under VIP watch on site. Nobody will be kicking down your door before I kick them in the balls. He tossed a gold-plated USB drive to Bridge. And you, review that when you have a chance. Take care of it. It's the only copy. Well, one of you will sleep on the couch. The other will need to make do with the floor. Fox sent down a duffel bag. I'll take the floor. I don't mind. Dietrich moved past him and the door frame and started looking around nervously. Are you missing something, Dietrich? Bridge came in behind him. What? No, it's a nice house. Dietrich set his suitcase and laptop bag in the corner. Fox pressed his fingers to his lips and whispered, Shush. Child is sleeping. He pointed above his head. Ah, shit. Sorry. Sorry. No. I must go and pay the babysitter. Bathrooms down the hall. Dietrich made a beeline for the bathroom first. He closed the door gently and stared into the mirror. He didn't see Merle since they had left the site. Merle? Merle? Where the hell you run off to? He shrugged and used the opportunity to shower privately, which was a treat for him. Bridge did the same when it was his turn. Dietrich stacked a few blankets on the floor and then draped one over himself. At least I'm not gonna get kidnapped again tonight.
Dietrich, sir, would you mind plugging me in? I'm down to 12% on this battery.
Ah, whoops. Sorry. Alex here.
Dietrich fumbled for the charger and plugged his mobile device into the nearest outlet.
Want me to ask for the Wi-Fi password, or?
No need. I cracked it when we first got in range. I'm all good for syncing.
All right. Good night, then.
Night, sir.
Dietrich's phone went into a blank loading screen as Alexandra worked on syncing up with her mainframe counterpart. As he rolled over, he saw Merle standing in the reflection of the metal refrigerator surface. Merle casually waved hello. Dietrich, knowing he wasn't the only one in the house, signaled to him while laying down. Where did you go? Merle paused and panned his head from side to side a bit before responding. Just wanted to look around. Dietrich started to sign back, but paused when Bridge walked in. You'll excuse me if I just go to bed direct, Dee. Kidnapping kinda wears me down. Dee. That's a familiar nickname he hadn't heard in a good long while.
Yeah, no problem, Bridge. Night.
Night. Dietrich waited for him to roll over and then continued. Stay around. Do not wonder. Merle just dismissed him with a gesture and moved over to the reflection of the window as the lookout. His usual routine since he was incapable of sleep. It didn't take long for Dietrich to doze off. Thanks again, Stephanie. Here is some extra money for the unexpected timing.
No worries, Mr. Fox. I had to study for a big final tomorrow anyhow. Good night.
Night. Fox closed the door on the babysitter and turned into the kitchen for a glass of water. A strange shiver crawled up his back as he felt compelled to look at the kitchen window. Nothing. But a view overlooking the quiet suburban street. He then looked across the way to see both Bridge and Dietrich fast asleep. Fox shook his head, put the glass in the sink, and yawned. One last stop before his bedroom. He wanted to check on Lucille. Passing through the hallway, he noticed that the light in her room was still on. Honey, Fox opened the door gently and peeked in.
Hi, Daddy.
Lucille rubbed her eye and yawned as she placed a plastic kettle next to her books. Lucille, it is very late for tea time. Fox looked down to see cups for 4. Elsa, Anna, and Olaf will be around for your breakfast tea in the morning. Admittedly, he had seen Frozen far too many times to know the characters and song by heart. He gathered the cups and put them next to the kettle.
No, not Olaf, Daddy. I made a new friend.
Oh, really? Fox picked her up and tossed her into bed.
He's black and fuzzy and wears a mask and likes to make shadow puppets, and he...
All right, hush now. Time to sleep. Tell your new friend to sleep too. Fox tucked her in suddenly.
He left already.
Well, I'm sure he has things to take care of. Maybe you will see him in the morning, hmm? Lucille rolled over to the side of the bed facing the nightlight.
But I don't know if he likes pancakes.
We don't have to have pancakes if you don't want to, he smiled. We'll just ask him what he wants for breakfast in the morning then, okay?
Okay. Good night, Daddy.
Fox smiled and closed her door, leaving just a small crack open, then went to bed himself.
Day?
Betty squeezed her son as hard as she could.
Ma, please.
Dietrich squeezed past the doorframe and shuffled inside. Mother, still attached.
Why, howdy, Day. We cooked your favorite. Open-faced roast beef sandwich.
Jeff then lurched out of his chair towards the dining room. The old man pulled a chair for his wife to sit on next to him, then sat down himself. Before Betty could even think of sitting down, she hustled up the stairs, down the hall, and through the first door on the right to retrieve one more person. What followed were the slow and steady footsteps of Dietrich's deaf older brother, Bertrand. Why a simple country couple insisted on naming their offsprings with old German first names, coupled with a proud Scottish family surname, Dietrich would never know. He also forgot why he was back home in the first place. He looked at the wall to see blurry photographs of their relatives living in the old country. He used to love hearing about fairy tales from Granddaddy Murdoch, but that was very long ago when him and Bertrand were waist high. The whole Lurk family sat down and laughed and talked of older times, funnier times, even some strange times. Dietrich signed to Bertrand, who was looking a bit worn for wear. Sick, big brother. Bertrand shook his head and signed back. No, tired, bad sleep. Bertrand's phone vibrated loudly, but nobody seemed to care much, except Bertrand, who struggled to keep his phone out of his pocket and then stare at the text message. Dietrich cocked his head a bit as he chewed his meal. Who is that? Your boss. Bertrand signed nothing back and shuffled outside with slow, hollow footsteps. Dietrich sat puzzled and looked at the fuzzy faces of his parents.
What's wrong with Bert?
Dietrich woke himself up and rubbed his face, trying to dismiss it as a weird dream. The smell of eggs and coffee were a good distraction. He rolled out and made several cracking noises as he rose up from the hard floor. Morning, Dietrich. Bridge was chewing on a bagel, looking dressed and ready for the day, while sitting in front of his laptop. He was preoccupied with monitoring Alexandra decrypt the flash drive. Dietrich groggily lurched from a chair and sat. Across from him was a 6-year-old girl with messy brown hair wearing frozen pajamas. He watched her almost zombified as she feverishly scribbled with a black crayon on paper. Dietrich. Huh? What? Fox squinted his eyes at him. I said, how do you like your eggs? Dietrich ran his finger through his hair and straightened at his shirt a bit. Over easy. Run a yolks if you can manage.
Ew,
Lucille commented. Fox cracked 2 eggs into a skillet. Lucille, that is not nice. Some people just like it that way. Lucille looked up from a drawing.
But gooey eggs look like boogies.
Lucille, we don't say gross things at the table. Fox planted her fork into a clump of scrambled eggs and put it in her other hand. Come on, less drawing, more eating. This one yours, Fox? Dietrich poured himself a cup of coffee. He could tell that Fox used the European brand just by smell alone. No. I just found her outside this morning. Must be stray. Lucille giggled as Fox straightened a few strands of messy hair. Yeah, Lucille, this is Mr. Lurk. Can you say hi? Lucille smiled and waved. Dietrich nodded back.
I like the way you talk. You talk like the tow truck in my Cars movie.
Bridge managed to not choke on his bagel in the background. Dietrich just smiled. Where I come from, everyone talks pretty much like this, little lady. He made sure to add that extra layer of twang for her. Fox slid a plate of eggs in front of him. Dietrich reached out for the pepper to sprinkle some on. Fox sat down with his own plate of food and looked over at Lucille's paper. What is this?
That's me. That's my new friend, and that's our house. Can we put it on the fridge?
Sure, we can. He slid the paper towards him and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet. Fox also made a mental note to have a chat with the babysitter about what kind of shows Lucille was watching before bedtime. Dietrich went pale and ejected coffee out of his nose and mouth, covering the front of his shirt and plated eggs.
We don't spit at the table,
Lucille corrected him. Fox actually got up and approached him. Whoa, you all right? Bridge, however, was frozen in place. He had extensive knowledge of the SCP main list, with a specialization in the Euclid class. In 2.5 seconds, he connected the dots between Dietrich's behavior, Lucille's drawing, and a particular image file recovered from a phone a while back. The pieces clicked together in his head. Why Dietrich was always looking at his reflection, and why he talked to himself, and why he stayed under the radar for so long. What the hell Merle is? It's fucking 1471! Bridge breathed, his eyes turning to Dietrich.
Ooh, Daddy, he's had a bad TV work,
Lucille shouted. Language! What is wrong with you two? Fox barked as he lifted up the oven mitt in preparation for a throw. Then he lowered it again. Slowly. Bridge, what did you just say? And that's all we have time for today. Next week, we'll come back with Up to No Good by Lurk D, which continues this rather precarious situation. But thank you very much for coming, and I hope you all have a good time out there.